The void of space whispered secrets that only the most attuned could hear. Captain Elena Rodriguez felt those secrets pulse through the neural interfaces embedded beneath her skin, a labyrinth of quantum connections that transformed her body into a living, breathing communication network. The stealth ship Whisper hung in space like a phantom, its adaptive camouflage rendering it indistinguishable from the surrounding cosmic background radiation. Inside, 5 individuals sat in absolute stillness, not through discipline, but through a technological marvel that made traditional military training look like a child's playground game. Elena's eyes flickered, not blinking, but scanning. Microscopic augmentations allowed her to process visual information at speeds that would make traditional sensors look primitive. To her left, Kai Chen's fingers danced across a holographic interface that existed only in his neural space. No physical touch, no sound, just pure thought translated into computational precision. Colony status, she thought. The command rippled through her team's neural network. Kai's response came not as words, but as a burst of compressed visual data. New Horizon, a frontier colony on the edge of human-controlled space, had gone completely dark. No distress signals, no emergency broadcasts, just absolute, terrifying silence. Most military units would have responded with massive firepower, sensor sweeps, and loud communication protocols. The United Earth Special Operations Team was different. They were the ghosts of human military doctrine, specialists in turning silence into the most powerful weapon imaginable. Lucia Martinez, the team's psychological warfare expert, projected a 3-dimensional holographic model of the colony. Her augmentations allowed her to process complex emotional and behavioral patterns faster than most artificial intelligence systems. Something was wrong, but the wrongness was more nuanced than a simple attack. Preliminary analysis suggests deliberate information suppression. Lucia's thought rippled through the neural network, not destruction. Containment. A massive alien vessel materialized on their long-range sensors. The Krelax Imperium, a civilization renowned for overwhelming force and sensory saturation. Their military doctrine relied on massive energy signatures, communication floods, and psychological intimidation. They were the exact opposite of the human team's philosophy. Dr. Aidan Roberts, the team's xenotechnology specialist, began analyzing the Krelax vessel's signature. His augmentations weren't just technological enhancements. They were a complete reimagining of human sensory perception. Where traditional sensors saw energy signatures, Aidan saw communication patterns, technological ecosystems, potential vulnerabilities. They're waiting, he transmitted. But waiting for what? Elena's neural interface pulsed with a command sequence. The team would investigate, but not through traditional means. They would become the colony, become the space around the colony, become the very fabric of the environment they were about to explore. Their suits, if they could be called suits, were living technologies, adaptive camouflage that wasn't just visual but could manipulate electromagnetic spectrum, thermal signatures, even quantum-level interactions. They weren't just wearing technology. They were technology. The 5th team member, Maya Gonzalez, began preparing their infiltration vectors. Her specialty was environmental adaptation. She could make the team indistinguishable from their surroundings, turning them into living, breathing chameleons that could move through any environment undetected. Infiltration parameters set, Maya's thought cascaded through the neural network. We become New Horizon. As the Whisper began its approach, the team transformed. Not through physical change, but through a complete recalibration of their technological and biological systems. They would enter the colony not as an invasion force, but as a living, breathing intelligence network. The mystery of New Horizon's silence waited. The Krelax vessel loomed in the distance, a massive testament to loud, aggressive military technology. And between them, 5 humans who understood that the most powerful weapon was not sound, but the ability to move through silence like a quantum ghost. Elena Rodriguez smiled, Not with her face. Such crude physical expressions were relics of a less sophisticated age. Her smile was a neural pulse, a moment of anticipation that rippled through her team's collective consciousness. The investigation was about to begin. The Krelax command deck pulsed with nervous energy. Voxnar, chief sensor officer of the massive dreadnought Resonance of Dominance, slammed his 6-jointed appendages against holographic displays that flickered with increasingly erratic sensor readings. "Impossible," he hissed, his translator implant converting the complex series of clicks and membrane vibrations into standard galactic communication. "We are detecting nothing, yet something is definitely present." Commander Krelax, a towering figure of biological and technological integration, studied the displays with growing frustration. The Krelax prided themselves on total sensory dominance. Their military doctrine was built on the principle of overwhelming information warfare, massive energy signatures, constant communication floods, and psychological intimidation through technological superiority. But today, something was breaking their understanding of warfare. Meanwhile, Rodriguez's team had already penetrated the outer perimeter of New Horizon Colony. Each member moved with a fluidity that defied traditional understanding of movement. Their adaptive camouflage wasn't just visual, it was a complete quantum-level manipulation of environmental interaction. Lucia Martinez began her true work. She wasn't a traditional intelligence operative. She was a psychological warfare architect. Her augmentations allowed her to process complex behavioral patterns at speeds that would make most artificial intelligence systems look primitive. Where others saw a colony, she saw a complex psychological ecosystem waiting to be understood and manipulated. Kai Chen's fingers, if they could be called fingers, danced across quantum communication networks. He wasn't hacking in the traditional sense. He was rewriting the very language of technological communication. Each signal he introduced was a carefully crafted narrative, a digital whisper that would reshape the Krelax's understanding of their environment. Detecting multiple anomalous patterns, Kai transmitted to the team. But detecting was too crude a term. He was weaving a complex tapestry of misinformation, each thread designed to create maximum psychological disruption. On the Krelax command deck, sensor officers began to panic. Their most advanced tracking systems, capable of detecting microscopic energy variations across entire star systems, were returning nothing. No heat signatures, no electromagnetic emissions, no quantum entanglement traces. Nothing. But something was definitely wrong. Dr. Aidan Roberts analyzed the colony's infrastructure. What the Krelax saw as a potential target, he recognized as a sophisticated trap. Every building, every piece of technology had been subtly modified. The entire colony was a living, breathing misinformation generator. "They've turned the entire environment into a weapon," Aidan transmitted. His augmentations allowed him to see beyond traditional technological boundaries. Where others saw structures, he saw communication networks, potential energy flows, psychological trigger points. Maya Gonzalez completed the team's environmental integration. Her specialty wasn't just camouflage. She could make the team become the environment. Quantum-level adaptive technologies allowed them to bend local reality, creating perceptual blind spots that defied traditional understanding of stealth. The first true revelation emerged. New Horizon wasn't a colony under attack. It was a meticulously prepared stage for a psychological warfare demonstration that would redefine interstellar conflict. Voxnar's sensor displays began to show impossible readings, phantom energy signatures, communication ghosts, potential threat vectors that appeared and disappeared faster than their most advanced processing systems could comprehend. "We are being studied," Commander Krelax realized with growing horror. Not attacked. Studied. Rodriguez's team wasn't just gathering intelligence. They were systematically dismantling the Krelax's fundamental understanding of warfare. Each movement, each transmitted signal was a carefully constructed narrative designed to create maximum psychological disruption. The Krelax had built their entire civilization on the principle of overwhelming force and total sensory dominance. They were about to learn that the most powerful weapon wasn't technology. It was understanding, and humanity was about to give them a masterclass. The Krelax response was predictably massive and catastrophically misguided. Entire battle groups mobilized, massive energy weapons charged to destructive capacities that could reduce entire planetary systems to cosmic dust. Their communication networks exploded with frantic transmissions, each more desperate than the last. They were fighting ghosts. Kai Chen's fingers, quantum computational extensions more sophisticated than entire previous generations of human technology, danced across multiple communication spectrums. He wasn't just hacking. He was conducting an intricate symphony of digital deception, each note a carefully crafted lie designed to maximum psychological effect. Initiating complex misinformation cascade, he transmitted to the team. But transmission was too crude a concept. His thoughts rippled through their neural network, a living communication organism that redefined the very concept of intelligence sharing. On the Krelax primary battle network, impossible scenarios began to emerge. Communication channels showed internal sabotage. Sensor arrays detected threat vectors that shifted and changed faster than their most advanced processing systems could comprehend. Entire battle groups began to turn on each other, convinced of massive internal conspiracies. Dr. Aidan Roberts watched the unfolding chaos with clinical precision. His augmentations allowed him to see beyond traditional technological boundaries. Where others saw communication networks, he saw psychological ecosystems waiting to be manipulated. They're cannibalizing their own strategic capabilities. Aidan transmitted. Each response is making them more vulnerable. Lucia Martinez was the true architect of this psychological warfare. Her augmentations processed complex behavioral patterns at speeds that would make most artificial intelligence systems look like primitive calculating machines. She wasn't just observing the Krelax response. She was sculpting it, creating a narrative of paranoia and self-destruction. Maya Gonzalez completed the team's environmental integration. Her specialty wasn't just camouflage. She could make the team become the environment. Quantum-level adaptive technologies allowed them to create perceptual blind spots that defied traditional understanding of stealth. The Krelax command deck descended into madness. Commander Krelax watched in growing horror as their supposedly invincible battle networks collapsed from within. Sensor Officer Voxnar's six-jointed appendages trembled as impossible data streams flooded their systems. "We are under attack," Krelax roared. But from where? The answer was everywhere and nowhere. Rodriguez's team had transformed warfare from a physical confrontation to a complex communication problem. Each signal was a weapon. Each piece of misinformation a strategic asset. They were rewriting the fundamental understanding of conflict. Massive Krelax warships, technological marvels designed for total sensory dominance, began to drift. Communication networks collapsed. Battle groups received contradictory orders from seemingly legitimate sources. The more they tried to respond, the more vulnerable they became. The most terrifying weapon was revealed: humanity's capacity to transform information itself into a strategic asset. Total information dominance achieved. Elena Rodriguez transmitted, not as a victory declaration, but as a clinical observation of a complex systemic transformation. The Krelax were fighting an enemy they couldn't comprehend, an enemy that didn't exist in traditional physical space, an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere, turning their most advanced technologies into instruments of their own destruction. Humanity had just demonstrated that the most powerful weapon wasn't technology. It was understanding. The interrogation room was unlike anything the Krelax had ever experienced. No physical restraints, no visible technology, just a space that seemed to breathe with psychological tension. Lucia Martinez sat across from the captured Krelax communication officer, her presence a calculated weapon more precise than any physical instrument. Her neural augmentations processed behavioral patterns at quantum speeds, reading micro-expressions that existed beyond traditional sensory perception. The Krelax officer, designated Zarek by his species' communication protocols, began to break not through physical torture, but through a masterclass of psychological dismantling. Each question from Lucio was a surgical strike against his cognitive defenses. "Tell me about New Horizon," she said, but the words were more than sound. They were a complex quantum communication event designed to bypass linguistic barriers and strike directly at the psychological core of information retention. Zarek's biological communication implants began to fail. The more he tried to resist, the more his own technological defenses became instruments of his psychological destruction. Lucio wasn't extracting information. She was redesigning his entire understanding of communication. The truth emerged in fractured, terrifying clarity. New Horizon was never just a colony. It was meant to be a staging ground for a massive invasion of human-controlled space. The Krelax had planned a total systemic assault that would have reshaped galactic power dynamics. Elena Rodriguez received the information not as a traditional transmission, but as a complete cognitive package. Her neural interfaces processed the data, transforming raw intelligence into a strategic ecosystem. They intended total cultural erasure. She transmitted to the team. The words were a gross simplification of a complex quantum communication event that contained layers of psychological and strategic implications. Dr. Aidan Roberts began analyzing the strategic implications, where others saw a potential military threat. He saw a complex communication problem waiting to be solved. The Krelax invasion plan wasn't just a military strategy. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of human adaptive capabilities. Kai Chen's fingers, quantum computational extensions more sophisticated than entire previous generations of human technology, began weaving a response. Not a traditional military countermeasure, but a complete redesign of the strategic landscape. "We will not just stop the invasion," Kai transmitted. "We will make the very concept of attacking humans unthinkable." Maya Gonzalez prepared the team's next move. Her specialty wasn't just environmental adaptation. She could transform entire strategic landscapes through microscopic interventions. Where traditional military strategists saw conflict as a physical confrontation, she saw it as a complex communication ecosystem. A series of precisely engineered incidents began to take shape. Krelax ships would mysteriously lose power. Communication networks would collapse in ways that defied traditional understanding. Battle groups would receive contradictory orders from seemingly legitimate sources. The invasion plan would dissolve not through violence, but through calculated psychological destruction. Rodriguez's response was elegant in its horrifying simplicity. They would transform warfare from a physical confrontation to a complex communication problem. Each signal would be a weapon. Each piece of misinformation a strategic asset. The Krelax were about to learn that the most powerful weapon wasn't technology. It was understanding. And humanity was preparing to give them a masterclass in total strategic reimagination. The psychological crucible was heating up, and the Krelax had no idea what was about to consume them. The Krelax leadership structure began to fracture like quantum-entangled glass. Their rigid hierarchical system, once their greatest strength, became a fatal vulnerability that the human team ruthlessly exploited. Lucia Martinez was the primary architect of this systematic deconstruction. Her psychological warfare capabilities went far beyond traditional intelligence operations. She didn't just gather information. She rewrote behavioral ecosystems. Carefully crafted misinformation suggested multiple competing factions within the Krelax leadership. Each transmission was a precision-guided psychological missile designed to exploit the smallest cognitive vulnerabilities in their communication networks. Kai Chen's quantum communication manipulation reached new heights of complexity. He wasn't just interrupting communications, he was creating an entirely new language of strategic misinformation. Each signal was a multidimensional puzzle, simultaneously true and false, existing in a state of perpetual quantum uncertainty. Initiating deep systemic disruption, Kai transmitted to the team. But transmission was a crude term for the complex quantum information exchange that rippled through their neural network. Dr. Aidan Roberts analyzed the emerging patterns. His augmentations allowed him to see communication networks as living, breathing ecosystems, Where others saw random disruptions, he saw a carefully orchestrated symphony of psychological warfare. The Krelax command structure began to experience total systemic breakdown. Communication channels became labyrinths of contradictory information. Sensor networks detected threats that existed in multiple potential states simultaneously. Maya Gonzalez completed the team's environmental integration. Her adaptive technologies could manipulate perception at quantum levels. She didn't just create visual camouflage. She could bend the very fabric of informational reality. On the primary Krelax command vessel, Commander Krelax watched in growing horror as their supposedly impenetrable communication networks dissolved from within. Sensor Officer Voxnar's 6-jointed appendages trembled as impossible data streams flooded their systems. Elena Rodriguez became a legend, a phantom that the Krelax could neither capture nor understand. Her team used minimal resources to create maximum chaos, turning the aliens' own communication and battle networks into instruments of self-destruction. Each intervention was calculated with surgical precision, a communication channel subtly redirected, a sensor network momentarily confused, a battle group receiving contradictory orders from seemingly legitimate sources. The human team didn't just gather intelligence. They rewrote the fundamental understanding of strategic communication. Massive Krelax warships, technological marvels designed for total sensory dominance, began to drift aimlessly. Their once celebrated communication networks collapsed into chaos. Battle groups turned inward, consumed by manufactured internal conspiracies. Total information dominance achieved. Rodriguez transmitted, not as a victory declaration, but as a clinical observation of a complex systemic transformation. The Krelax were experiencing a total reimagination of conflict. Warfare was no longer about physical confrontation. It had become a complex communication problem that their rigid technological paradigms couldn't comprehend. Humanity had just demonstrated that the most powerful weapon wasn't technology. It was understanding. And they were about to deliver a masterclass in total strategic reimagination. The information war had only just begun. The primary Krelax command ship hung in space like a wounded leviathan, its massive technological prowess rendered impotent by an enemy it couldn't comprehend. Rodriguez's team prepared for their most audacious move yet, an infiltration that would redefine the very concept of military engagement. Maya Gonzalez initiated the approach. Her adaptive camouflage technologies went beyond mere visual concealment. She could manipulate quantum-level interactions, making the team essentially non-existent to traditional sensor technologies. They weren't just entering the ship, they were becoming the ship's environmental system. Kai Chen's fingers, quantum computational extensions more sophisticated than entire previous generations of human technology, began their most complex communication manipulation yet. He wasn't just hacking. He was conducting a symphonic dismantling of the Krelax technological ecosystem. Initiating total systems integration, he transmitted. But transmission was too crude a concept. His thoughts rippled through their neural network, a living communication organism that redefined intelligence sharing. Dr. Aidan Roberts analyzed the ship's technological infrastructure with terrifying precision. Where others saw a massive warship, he saw a complex communication network waiting to be reimagined. Each system, each communication channel became a potential vector for psychological warfare. Lucia Martinez prepared the psychological component of their infiltration. Her augmentations processed complex behavioral patterns at speeds that would make most artificial intelligence systems look like primitive calculating machines. She wasn't just preparing to enter the ship. She was preparing to completely reshape its internal cognitive landscape. The infiltration began not with violence, but with a complete reimagining of technological interaction. Holographic technologies created phantom communication channels. Quantum-level signal manipulations introduced impossible data streams. The ship's own communication networks became weapons of its own destruction. Commander Krelax watched in growing horror as their supposedly impenetrable systems began to collapse. Sensor Officer Voxnar's 6-jointed appendages trembled as impossible data streams flooded their systems. Not a single weapon was fired. Not a single human was physically seen. Yet the entire Krelax command structure began to disintegrate from within. Communication networks collapsed into chaos. Sensor systems detected threats that existed in multiple potential states simultaneously. Battle coordination dissolved into a nightmare of contradictory information. Rodriguez's team demonstrated a fundamental reimagining of warfare. They weren't destroying the ship through traditional means. They were completely dismantling its ability to function as a coherent technological organism. Total systems compromise achieved. Elena transmitted, not as a victory declaration, but as a clinical observation of a complex systemic transformation. The Krelax were experiencing a total psychological and technological breakdown. Their rigid military doctrine, built on overwhelming force and total sensory dominance, became their greatest weakness. Humanity had just demonstrated that the most powerful weapon wasn't technology. It was understanding. And they were about to deliver the final lesson in total strategic reimagination. The silent siege reached its crescendo. The moment of ultimate confrontation arrived not with thunderous explosions or massive energy discharges, but with a communication event that would reshape galactic understanding of conflict. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood, metaphorically, for her presence was more a quantum information state than a physical positioning, before the Krelax leadership. Her neural interfaces pulsed with a communication complexity that defied traditional linguistic boundaries. Lucia Martinez had prepared this moment with surgical precision. Her psychological warfare capabilities transcended traditional intelligence operations. She had meticulously dismantled the Krelax cognitive defenses, layer by intricate layer. "We are here to communicate," Rodriguez transmitted. But transmission was a grotesque simplification of the quantum information event that unfolded. Kai Chen's computational extensions began weaving a demonstration that was part communication, part strategic exposition, part philosophical revelation. He wasn't just sharing information. He was restructuring the fundamental understanding of interstellar conflict. The holographic space around them transformed, not through traditional visual representation, but through a multidimensional information cascade that showed the entire strategic intervention as a living, breathing communication ecosystem. The Krelax leadership witnessed their own strategic failures reimagined as a complex communication problem. Every military decision, every technological intervention was shown as a communication event with psychological implications far beyond traditional understanding. Dr. Aidan Roberts provided the scientific framework. His augmentations allowed him to translate complex quantum interactions into comprehensible strategic narratives. Where others saw technological confrontation, he demonstrated a fundamental reimagining of conflict as information exchange. Maya Gonzalez manipulated the environmental perception, creating a demonstration space that existed simultaneously in multiple potential states. The very fabric of their perception became a communication medium. They showed the Krelax something terrifying. Warfare was not about destruction. It was about communication. Every signal was a weapon. Every piece of misinformation a strategic asset. Conflict was a complex dialogue conducted through technological and psychological channels. The Krelax leadership began to comprehend the true nature of their defeat. They hadn't been conquered through traditional means. They had been systematically communicated into a state of total strategic vulnerability. "Conflict is conversation," Rodriguez transmitted. The words were a quantum information event that restructured their entire understanding of military engagement. Humanity demonstrated that the most powerful weapon wasn't technology. It was understanding. A complete, total, and fundamentally transformative understanding that redefined the very concept of interstellar conflict. The climax wasn't a moment of destruction. It was a moment of profound communication. The aftermath of the confrontation wasn't a traditional diplomatic resolution. It was a fundamental transformation of galactic understanding. Human diplomatic teams arrived not as conquerors, but as educators. They brought with them a new paradigm of interstellar communication that would reshape civilization's understanding of conflict, strategy, and mutual understanding. Captain Elena Rodriguez and her team became more than heroes. They became living symbols of a revolutionary approach to interstellar engagement. Their operation, Noiseless operation, would be studied in military and diplomatic academies across multiple species for generations. The Krelax were forced to completely reimagine their entire concept of military and diplomatic engagement. Their rigid hierarchical structure, once their greatest strength, had become their most significant weakness. Humanity demonstrated that true strategic superiority came from adaptability, psychological understanding, and communication. Kai Chen began developing new communication protocols that would serve as a bridge between human and Krelax technological ecosystems. His quantum communication extensions weren't just technological tools. They were living bridges between fundamentally different understanding of interaction. Lucia Martinez worked with xenopsychologists to develop new frameworks for cross-species communication. Her understanding went far beyond traditional linguistic translation. She was creating entire new models of psychological interaction that transcended species-specific cognitive limitations. Dr. Aidan Roberts documented the technological innovations that made the operation possible. His research would revolutionize understanding of quantum communication, adaptive technologies, and interspecies strategic engagement. Maya Gonzalez continued developing environmental adaptation technologies that would reshape how different species understood technological integration. Her work suggested that camouflage and adaptive technologies were more than defensive mechanisms. They were complex communication tools. The Galactic community watched in awe as humanity demonstrated a completely new approach to conflict resolution. Traditional military powers found themselves obsolete. Diplomatic institutions were forced to completely redesign their engagement strategies. Conflict is communication became more than a philosophical statement. It became a fundamental principle of interstellar engagement. Rodriguez's team had done more than win a conflict. They had rewritten the fundamental understanding of how different civilizations could interact. The most powerful weapon wasn't technology. It wasn't military might. It was understanding. Pure, complex, multidimensional understanding that transformed conflict into conversation. The human team had just changed everything. And they had done it without firing a single weapon. The universe would never be the same.